They say a town doesn't die all at once. It fades, one light at a time, but ours went dark in a single summer. It started with the posters, bright, smiling families under bold letters. Progress comes to Brookville, the kind of posters that made everything sound like a miracle. Wider roads, bigger stores, brighter tomorrow. Only no one asked if tomorrow was worth the trade. Main Street was our heartbeat. Cobblestones that echoed with morning steps, the smell of fresh bread from Mayfield's bakery, the jingle of the bell over Henderson's market door. That street had been my childhood map. Every corner a story, every face familiar, and one by one they started to disappear. The movie theater came down first. The Majestic, its neon sign, had been half broken for years, the J flickering like it couldn't decide whether to stay. Then came the barber shop, the diner, the hardware store with the creaky wooden floor, all sold, boarded up, and flattened under the same promise of new beginnings, but not Henderson's. No, old Mr. Henderson didn't believe in progress. Or maybe he just didn't believe in letting go. Every morning, while trucks roared and dust rose down the block, he'd sweep his sidewalk clean. He'd open the market like he had for 40 years, flip the sign to open, straighten the apples, check the scale, wipe the glass on the milk cooler. You'd think the noise outside would bother him, but it never did. He worked slow, steady, like time still listened to him. Kids used to call his shop the last light. Adults said he was stubborn. I thought he was brave. I was 12 when they first said Main Street would be gone by fall. Back then I didn't understand what it meant. Not really. The men in suits said it was progress, that people needed parking spaces and shopping centers. But to me it sounded like they were erasing a part of who we were. Every day after school, I'd stop by Henderson's for a bottle of soda. The place smelled of wood polish and oranges. Mr. Henderson always wore the same apron, faded blue with the name Henry stitched on the pocket. Once I asked him why he didn't sell the place. He smiled, that tired kind of smile people give when they've already made peace with their fate. Said as long as there's light in the window, the town's still alive. That was all he said, but it stuck with me. By August, the rest of the street was rubble. Only Henderson's market stood, one brick building surrounded by piles of broken stone and the echo of what used to be laughter. People came to watch, some out of curiosity, some out of guilt. And every morning the bulldozers waited at the end of the block, their engines idling like wolves before the hunt. But every time the foreman walked up to talk to him, Mr. Henderson would shake his head politely. Not today. He'd close his door and return to weighing apples. The mayor tried persuasion. "We'll build you a bigger shop in the plaza," he said. "Air conditioning, glass doors, parking lot, everything new." Henry only smiled. "But it wouldn't be this one." The mayor sighed, turned, and left. By then, even the children had stopped laughing about it. They began to understand. The old man wasn't fighting to win. He was fighting to matter, to leave something standing when everything else chose to disappear. I remember one afternoon walking by just as the workers paused for lunch. The air smelled like sawdust and gasoline. Mr. Henderson was behind the counter, his hands trembling slightly as he stacked cans of soup. Sunlight cut through the window and fell across his face. For a second he looked peaceful, like a man who already knew how his story would end, but chose to live the ending anyway. That night I passed by again. The rest of Main Street was covered in tarp and dust. But through his window, I saw him sitting behind the counter, the radio playing some slow tune from decades ago. The sign above the door still glowed faintly. Open. The whole town was dark, but that little store still burned like a heartbeat that refused to stop. Years later, when I was grown and gone, I drove back through Brookville. The new shopping complex stretched for blocks, concrete, glass, and signs in colors too bright to feel real. And right in the middle of it, at the end of a parking lane, was an empty square of dirt, fenced off with old boards. No plaque, no marker, just space. I pulled over and sat there a while, watching people hurry in and out of stores. No one slowed down. No one looked at that patch of ground. But I did, a man who kept his promise long after everyone else had sold theirs. And even though the lights were gone, I could almost see it, that little open sign, flickering in the dusk, fighting to stay lit one more night. Henry Henderson wasn't the kind of man people noticed at first glance. He was quiet in a world that rewarded noise, thin, with white hair that never quite stayed combed, and hands that always smelled faintly of soap and oranges. If you passed him on the street, you might think he was just another tired shopkeeper. But in our town he was something else entirely, the man who refused to move. He'd come back from the war with a limp and a promise. The limp never left, the promise never faded. His wife, Clara, had kept the store running while he was overseas. She wrote him letters every week, long, careful ones, full of small-town details, what customers said, which pies sold fastest, how the radio sometimes caught the big city stations at night. When he returned in 1946, she handed him the key to the market and said, "It's yours again, Henry. Just don't let it change." He didn't. The store stayed the same for decades. The same wooden shelves, the same brass register, the same clock above the door that ran 4 minutes fast, so the customers can to say, "I ever kept them waiting," he'd joke. And the town loved him for it. Henderson's Market was where you stopped, not just for groceries, but for a breath of something familiar. By the time the redevelopment plans arrived, Clara was already gone. Her photograph sat beside the register, framed in cheap glass, her smile caught forever in a summer long past. Henry still talked to her sometimes. Not loudly, just a few quiet words while he stocked the bread or turned the sign each morning. He said it helped him remember how she'd keep the place alive through rationing and blackouts, when sugar was rare and hope was rationed too. When the city men came with their papers, Henry listened politely. They offered him money, more than the store was worth. They said things like modern infrastructure, traffic flow, urban renewal. He nodded, as if he understood, but when they finished, he simply said, "I have customers who still owe me 30 cents. Can't close before they settle up." They didn't get the joke, that as long as he kept opening those doors, some part of her and the life they'd built would stay in the air. He believed her. The mayor came in person one afternoon, dressed too neatly for our dusty town. "Henry," he said, "we're offering relocation, not eviction. You'll have a bigger store, better equipment. You deserve that. And what about the doorbell, Mr. Mayor?" "The doorbell?" He pointed above the frame. "It's been ringing for 40 years. My wife picked it out. Said every customer should feel welcome before they even see me." The mayor's expression softened. "You can bring it with you." Henry shook his head. It wouldn't sound the same somewhere else. The conversation ended there. I was 15 that summer, old enough to understand what was coming, but too young to do anything about it. I'd stop by after school, pretending to help with deliveries just to stay close. The demolition crews had already flattened half the street. You could stand in the doorway of Henderson's and see the skeleton of progress. Cranes, steel frames, glass panels catching the sun. Inside, though, time refused to move. The fan above the counter ticked softly, the same fly buzzing in the same window. There was comfort in the routine, in the way Henry measured flour by instinct, not weight, or how he'd hum old tunes while wrapping bread in brown paper. One afternoon I asked him what he'd do if they forced him out. He stopped mid-wrap and smiled, his eyes tired but kind. "You ever see a dandelion grow through concrete?" I nodded. He placed the loaf gently on the counter. "Then you know my plan." As the weeks passed, people started leaving notes on his window. Some said, "Thank you for staying." Others simply wrote their memories, first jobs, first dates, the smell of cinnamon in winter. He never mentioned them, but I saw how carefully he dusted around each one. And though he'd never admit it, I think he took strength from knowing the town hadn't he completely forgotten what it used to be. One evening a summer storm rolled in. Thunder shook the windows, rain beating against the glass so hard the street blurred into rivers. I rushed inside, soaked through, and found him standing in the dark, only the soft glow from the refrigerator lighting his face. He looked out at the empty street and said quietly, "They'll come tomorrow." His voice didn't shake. It was calm, too calm, like a man who had already made peace with the inevitable. I didn't know what to say, so I stood beside him, both of us watching the rain slide down the glass, washing away the reflection of his store. After a while, he whispered, "You can't stop the world from changing, but you can decide how you meet it." Then he turned the open sign around and locked the door for the night. It was the last time I saw him close up shop. By morning the clouds were gone, and the sun was mercilessly bright. Trucks lined the street. Men in hard hats moved with the cold precision of those who build by tearing down. But Henderson's market was still there, the front door open, the bell above it ready to ring. And behind the counter stood Henry, pressed shirt, clean apron, calm eyes, waiting, just like always. They said the bulldozers would start at noon, but somehow the whole town knew that what was about to happen would have nothing to do with schedules. They came a day ahead of schedule. No one announced it, no one warned him. The town woke up to the growl of engines and the scent of diesel. Sunlight glinted off the metal arms of the bulldozers as they lined up like beasts at the edge of the block, waiting for the signal. By 8 o'clock the sidewalks were full, not of workers but of neighbors. People who hadn't walked this way in years suddenly found a reason to. They didn't say it aloud, but everyone knew this was it, the last stand of Main Street, the last flicker of the world we'd all quietly let slip away. Henry Henderson was already at his counter. The bell above the door chimed as I stepped in. He looked up, smiled faintly, and said, "You're early." "So are they," I said, nodding toward the sound outside. He followed my gaze, then sighed. They couldn't wait another day, could they? I didn't answer. There wasn't anything to say. The shelves were half empty now. He'd stopped ordering new stock weeks ago. The apples in the basket had begun to wrinkle, but he'd still polished them that morning, just like always. The register sat open with a few coins inside. The radio hummed softly in the corner, a song from the 1940s, one of those melodies that makes you feel like the world was kinder once. He didn't move when the mayor arrived, didn't even glance up. The man stood in the doorway, sweating under his suit. "Henry," he began, voice rehearsed and hollow, "they've got a schedule to keep. Please don't make this harder than it needs to be." Henry turned the page of a ledger. "You ever think about what's hard for me, Mr. Mayor?" The mayor hesitated. "We offered you compensation, relocation." Henry chuckled softly. "And what's the price of 40 years of mornings? Of my wife's laughter behind that counter? You got that number on your clipboard, too?" The mayor opened his mouth, then closed it again. Finally, he muttered something about deadlines and backed out the door. The crowd outside began to grow. People stood on porches, leaning against lampposts, pretending they were just watching out of curiosity. But it wasn't curiosity, it was guilt. I stayed inside, near the front window, watching as dust started to rise from the machines. Henry didn't flinch. He adjusted the curtain and said, "Could you do me a favor, son?" "Turn the sign to open." I did. The bell jingled once. At exactly 11:30, the foreman walked up, tall, sunburned, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Henderson," he said, "we've been patient. I've got orders." "You always do." "Sir, we have to clear the site." "Then clear it," Henry said quietly, "when I'm done." The man frowned. "Done with what?" Henry looked around as if searching for the right words, then gestured toward the shelves. "With remembering," the foreman shifted his weight, uncertain. "We start in 30 minutes. Henry nodded once. "I'll be ready." The man walked away. Those 30 minutes stretched forever. The clock ticked. The crowd outside grew silent. Even the wind seemed to pause. Henry moved slowly, deliberately, wiping the counter, straightening the bread, folding his apron. He took Clara's photo from the shelf and placed it gently inside the register drawer, as though tucking her in. Then he turned off the radio. The store felt impossibly still. I wanted to say something, to tell him I was sorry or angry or both. But the lump in my throat made words impossible. He broke the silence instead. "Funny thing," he said softly. "When we first opened, I thought I'd grow old here, but I never pictured what that would mean. Turns out it's just staying long enough to watch everything else go." I stepped closer. "Henry, maybe you should." He lifted a hand. "Don't." He smiled again, a small, weary curve. "This place doesn't need saving. It just needs to be remembered." The foreman gave the signal at noon sharp. The engines roared to life. The air filled with the smell of exhaust and heat. And then something unexpected happened. Before the bulldozers could move, one of the workers shut off his engine. Then another, and another. Within moments, the whole line went quiet again. All eyes turned to Henry, standing at his door. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't waving a fist. He was just there, an old man with a limp, one hand on the doorframe, looking out at the street that had been his life. For a long minute, nobody moved. The crowd held its breath. Then, from somewhere in the back, a voice called out, "Let him close it himself." A murmur spread, heads nodded. Even the foreman lowered his clipboard. Henry took off his cap, nodded to no one in particular, and stepped outside. The sunlight hit him full in the face. He turned, looked up at the faded sign, Henderson's Market, and reached for the bell. It rang once. A clear, gentle sound that carried farther than it had any right to. He smiled. "That's the last customer served," he said. Then he closed the door. The crowd didn't cheer, they didn't clap. They just stood there as the old man walked away, his shadow stretching long across the pavement. When the machines finally moved, the first wall came down in seconds. The sound was thunderous, cruel, but even as the dust rose, the bell still echoed in my ears. One soft chime, defying everything that tried to bury it. By evening, nothing was left but rubble. But I swear, if you stood still enough, you could still smell apples and bread. And the air, somehow, still felt open. Years passed, and the town forgot how quiet Main Street used to sound. The plaza rose where the cobblestones once breathed. Wide glass windows, air conditioning, and the endless hum of lights replaced the creak of old doors and the soft jingle of the bell above Henderson's market. I moved away for a while, came back when I was older, out of habit more than purpose. The old street was gone, buried beneath parking lines and polished concrete. But if you stood at the far end of the lot, you could still tell where the store once stood. The light always seemed to fall a little differently there, like the sun remembered what people didn't. One afternoon I stopped by the library, where a local exhibit displayed remnants of old Brookville. In a small glass case sat something that froze me in place, the doorbell from Henderson's market. Brass a little bent, its spring stiff with rust. A note said it had been found in the rubble and kept safe for decades. The librarian told me they were thinking of mounting it in a museum. I said, "A bell doesn't belong behind glass," so they hung it instead at the community center beside the side entrance that everyone uses but nobody notices. The first time someone opened that door, it rang. The sound was thin, uncertain, but after a few weeks of hands, it settled, found its tone again. People didn't talk about it much, but the door became the one everyone chose to enter through. Old folks, teenagers, mothers with strollers, all brushing past, that small sound that seemed to greet them by name. When I brought my son years later, I didn't tell him why. We walked around the plaza, bought sodas, and stopped by the community center. I opened the side door and let him go first. The bell rang once, clear, gentle, familiar. He turned to me and smiled. "That's it?" he asked. "That's it," I said. "And it's enough." That night I dreamt of Main Street the way it was, sunlight on glass jars, Clara's laughter behind the counter, Henry's hand turning the sign from closed to open. In the dream I stepped inside, and the bell rang again, bright, alive, forgiving. When I woke I could still hear it, and sometimes when I passed through town at dusk, I rolled down my window. The plaza glows cold and silver, but somewhere beneath all that metal and light, I swear I still smell apples and wood polish. People think what Henry left behind was a story about standing still. They're wrong. What he left was a sound, one that still tells the world it's welcome. If this story brought back a memory, a street, a sound, or someone you once knew, consider subscribing. Every story here keeps those small moments alive, one memory at a time. Your like, your comment, your presence, they're what help us keep the past breathing.